300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field, the last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Cinco de Mayo, the first couple days of this week, there's been a lot to talk about. May the 4th be with you yesterday. Now we got Cinco de Mayo today, so a lot of great references going on this week and special days. So appreciate you taking some time on a Wednesday to be with me. There's so much to get into in not only the NBA. Draymond Green had some interesting comments about Steph Curry and teams potentially fearing him. The Pelicans behind Zion Williamson and Lonzo Ball making a bit of noise as we approach the NBA's play-in tournament. And which teams will end up making the play-in tournament? I have a lot of thoughts on that, both in the Western Conference and in the Eastern Conference. It's a very tight race. The Philadelphia Eagles, their GM, had some very interesting explanations for that awkward fist bump during the draft. And DK Metcalf, could he be an Olympic sprinter? All that is coming up at the end of the show. But we start today with LeBron James out of LA. More news has surfaced that he will be missing extended time, at least another 2 games to that injury that he sustained with his ankle. Re-aggravated it, experienced additional soreness, so he's going to be missing at least the next 2 games. Here's the thing if you're the Lakers. Right now, they're the 6th seed in the Western Conference. They're about just a half a game back. If not, they're tied with the Dallas Mavericks right now, 37-28 for the 5th and 6th seeds in the Western Conference. They're jockeying right now. But they just completed game 1 of what's going to be the most difficult 5-game stretch for them this year. They're facing 5 consecutive teams that are at least in the playoffs. They just faced the Nuggets. They've got the Clippers tomorrow night, the Trailblazers on Friday night. Then they've got the Suns and the Knicks, all teams that are destined to make the postseason, that have already qualified and reached the postseason with a berth. But when tragedy strikes, there's always the 5 stages of grief, right? You've got anger, denial, then anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. Those are the 5 stages of grief. The Lakers have just experienced the first 4 of those stages. And now they're finally in what's called the acceptance stage. Because the reality is the Lakers are in dire straits right now. Now, not to the point where I don't think they can compete for an NBA championship, but with regard to the fact that this is becoming more and more of a reality, that they could very likely be in the play-in tournament. Anthony Davis just said, "We're back," to his teammates after they beat the Denver Nuggets 93-89 a couple days ago to KCP. But even he will acknowledge and understand that the Lakers right now mentally are gearing up for the playoffs. For the play-in tournament. This was a play-in tournament that they simply scoffed at earlier in the year. They simply dismissed it, simply brushed it aside. And what's become more clear, what's become illuminated is by LeBron's injury, an extended injury, that this play-in tournament may very likely actually transpire. And it's that acceptance period that was so difficult for these Lakers to accept. LeBron vehemently opposed a play-in tournament, right? We remember how they treated this potential play-in tournament, and that's the mindset is, hey, we're above this tournament. We don't need to play in this because we won't be in a situation where that could become a reality. Now that it is, suddenly the tone is changing. We're seeing them hopefully play a little bit more together, a little bit more intense. It's almost as if you've got an unathletic friend, right? You've got an unathletic friend who you've seen run a couple 3 10-yard sprints, and all of a sudden they're gassed. So you make a bet with them. And you bet them that they cannot complete an entire mile without stopping. They're the unathletic friend. And if they can do it, then you will go run an entire marathon. And so you're chuckling, and all of a sudden you're watching your friend start to engage in this mile, and he's gassed, but all of a sudden he's through to the final lap of the marathon, of the mile. And all of a sudden you're taking a step back and saying, wait a second, this might become more and more of a reality that I'm going to have to prepare myself for the marathon. So you once chuckled, but now this is becoming more and more of a reality. And that's the situation that the Lakers find themselves in right now. A hypothetical scenario is now closer and closer becoming a reality, right? The kid's running a mile. All of a sudden, a nice cool breeze brushes him in the face. He's re-energized, and there's a good possibility he could finish this mile. But again, all of this hinges on LeBron's health. We've talked about this before. And LeBron even came out and said it. If he's not 100% healthy, doesn't matter where this team is, doesn't matter where they're seated, doesn't matter if they're in the play-in tournament, if they're the 10th seed. Doesn't matter if they're the 3 seed. If LeBron James isn't healthy, they won't go very far in the postseason. And that's what's the most amazing thing through all of this is, once again, the individual driving force, the sole driving force behind the Lakers resides in a guy who's 36, 18th season in the NBA. And he's still the catalyst. We all thought Anthony Davis would take the mantle. That hasn't happened yet. And it's amazing, again, in his 18th year, that an ankle injury could be the difference between potential ecstasy and misery for the Lakers this upcoming season. So it's getting close. It's getting close. We're ramping up. 2 weeks left in the NBA's regular season before the play-in tournament starts. And it's going to be interesting to see whether or not the Lakers, whether or not some of these other teams can actually make some final pushes as we approach the NBA's play-in tournament. And speaking of the NBA's play-in tournament, Draymond Green, the forward for the Golden State Warriors, had some interesting comments saying that teams are fearing Steph Curry. He said they're terrified of Steph. And of course, this is amid the torrid hot streak that he's been on, the shooting streak. He's been absolutely sensational. And he's really just kind of emboldened his team. And a couple days ago, he just dropped 41 points in a win over the Pelicans. Obviously, last night, he was on pace to surpass that number. He had 35 points midway through the third quarter, and then the lights came out at the Smoothie King Arena, and that just kind of shot all the confidence for whatever reason and all the rhythm and all the flow out of his game. But the reason why the NBA instituted a play-in tournament, it's because of the intrigue, because it provides hope, additional hope to teams and their fan bases, that there's still reasons to root for them, to cheer on teams late in the year. That's why the play-in tournament exists. because it enhances the excitement surrounding a franchise, surrounding a city. Again, offers an additional beacon of hope and kind of incentivizes teams to actually continue to play hard throughout the remainder of the season. It doesn't encourage teams now to tank and just hope to select a top 3 draft pick. No, now you actually have something worth playing for. And for the first time ever, that's what we're seeing. Late into a season, we're seeing that there is still a ton of compelling storylines, and not just for the 8th seed, because now it's not just about the 8th seed. It's about, can you make the top 6 cut? Are you going to avoid the play-in tournament? If you're on the outside of the play-in tournament, can you actually make it into the play-in tournament? This is the first time ever. If you look at the standings, there are only 3 teams in both the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference that are totally out of contention from reaching the postseason. The Rockets, the Timberwolves, and the Thunder in the Western Conference, and the Detroit Pistons, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Orlando Magic in the Eastern Conference. Or maybe I said Eastern for the Thunder, the Timberwolves, and the Rockets. That meant to be the Western Conference, Eastern Conference for Detroit, for Cleveland, and for Orlando. That's it. Only 6 total teams out of 24 are completely out of it. All other 24 teams still have reasons to play hard, still have things to play for. And that's what makes this so interesting, is because what the NBA did is they created their own mini NCAA tournament, a realistic, one and done, win or go home, single elimination style format to the NBA. It's one of the biggest reasons why the NCAA tournament, especially during those first 2 days, that Thursday and Friday, are 2 of the highest viewed sporting events throughout the entire season, throughout the entire year. It's because there's so much intrigue. It doesn't matter who's favored. You got one chance to make your mark. And that's the approach that a lot of these NBA teams have. And this is particularly relevant and pertinent to now, and especially pertinent to Draymond Green's comments, because this is exactly why teams like the Lakers vehemently oppose the NBA's play-in tournament. And this is why teams should fear Steph Curry, and why Draymond Green made these comments about teams fearing Steph Curry, because of this one and done situation. Did you see what he did with Davidson in college in 2008? They upset Georgetown as a 10th seed. Georgetown was a 2 seed, or rather they were the 7th seed. Davidson was a 10th seed in the first round. They knocked them off. Then, what was even more impressive, they followed that up, or they beat Gonzaga rather as the 7th seed. Then they beat Georgetown as the 2 seed in the round of 32. Then they beat Wisconsin as a 3 seed in the Sweet 16. They reached the Elite 8 and barely lost to a 1-seeded Kansas team in 2008. In fact, that was the Kansas team that ultimately went on to win the NCAA tournament, a national title. Steph Curry averaged 32 points per game during that season with Davidson in the tournament alone. Averaged the highest scoring mark in the tournament, the most number of three-pointers in the tournament. And he single-handedly carried that Davidson team. And it's because of the single elimination atmosphere and format. That's what makes him so dangerous. He is by far the hottest and streakiest NBA player that maybe we've ever seen. The only other argument you can make is his counterpart and his partner in crime in Klay Thompson, who's not playing right now, who's the only other guy that maybe can get hotter immediately and instantly the way that Steph Curry can. This is a guy who, for the season, averaging a career-high 31.4 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, 6 assists, 43% shooting on 12.7 three-point attempts per game. That's what Steph Curry's doing. In the month of April, averaged 37 points per game in the month of April. Through the first 3 games in May, he's accumulated 108 total points. That's what this guy is doing. And if you put him in a single elimination game where, hey, Warriors versus blank to advance to a postseason berth, yeah, I wouldn't want to face him either. The guy can shoot it from 30 feet consistently, and he's been absolutely on a tear. So what he provides is the ultimate trump card. He's the ultimate nullifier, the ultimate equalizer, and the ultimate heartbreaker all in the same moment. Because you can't contain him. It's unpredictable whether he's going to be hot, whether he's not. You can defend him. You can double team him. You can trap him, get the ball out of his hands. But the streak that he's on, I understand why LeBron vehemently opposes this. Because the Lakers right now, if they were to fall past the Portland Trailblazers, they'd be a 7th seed. Golden State right now is in the 8th spot. And those two teams would have to match up for a chance to go to the postseason. And in a one-game format, it's entirely possible anything can happen. It's like a game 7, win or go home. So I think Draymond Green is absolutely right. I absolutely think that teams would fear Steph and do fear Steph, especially in a playing tournament. Again, if you extend it over 7 games, it's still scary, but less so because you can game plan, you can make adjustments, but in a one-time shot, everything goes out the window. Everything goes out the window. So the other interesting storyline, and most of the time it hasn't been for the right reasons. Right? Most of the time when we've talked about the New Orleans Pelicans, it's been about underachieving. And unfortunately, that still is the storyline with this team. This team has underachieved all year. But they beat the Warriors last night, 108-103. And they're keeping their playoff hopes alive right now. They're just 2 games back of the San Antonio Spurs for the 10th and final playoff spot. Now, don't want to digress too much, but let me just give a shout out to Lonzo Ball, whose jersey is behind me right here. I always thought that he was on such a tumultuous ride when he was with the Lakers that I thought LeVar Ball just made it so impossible for him to thrive and for him to flourish in LA that it just exacerbated all the pressure of already the inherent pressure of being a number 2 overall pick. So I thought that really derailed his abilities to play freely the way that we're seeing right now in New Orleans. Because the way that he's been playing right now, this is the type of Lonzo Ball that people were expecting to see, that I was expecting to see on a more consistent basis. Not 33 points every single night, but the confidence, the swagger. One of the reasons why I loved his game was the flow, the pace, the rhythm that he plays with. And to be honest, it's one of the reasons why I never fully bought into Brandon Ingram being the face of this franchise. I understand why they signed him to that supermax. He deserved it based on his stats and the fact that he earned an all-star nod. But his style of play, it's very stagnant. The ball doesn't move. He's more of an ISO scorer. And I think he can be a complementary piece. I don't see him as being a face of a franchise. That's Zion Williamson. But the difference is the chemistry between Zion and Lonzo and the entire team, it's palpable. And I know Brandon Ingram kind of twisted his ankle midway through the second quarter, so hopefully he can come back for them. But I think the more important pieces were Zion Williamson and Lonzo Ball being fully healthy. And you look at what he's been doing in his last 3 games. 2 of those previous 3 games, he's dropped career highs, 33 points. He just tied it again last night. Career high 7 3-pointers in a game. Rather 8 a couple nights ago. Now he followed that up with 7 this time. He's been playing with so much more confidence. And again, hit that clutch jumper, the step back when it was all tied up in the fourth quarter. So he actually sealed the win for the Pelicans last night. And when you look at the Pelicans on paper, this is an extremely deep and talented team. You've got Zion Williamson, who was an all-star this year. Brandon Ingram was a former all-star last year. Lonzo Ball's ascending. Eric Bledsoe, Steven Adams. You've got the physicality. You've got the energy and the rebounding with Josh Hart and Jackson Hayes off the bench. This is a team that has tremendous raw talent. They almost remind me of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers from 2 years ago with Jameis Winston, where you look at Jameis Winston and you're saying, this team is absolutely loaded. This team is stacked. Here you have a guy in Jameis Winston who's throwing for 5,000 yards, but he's also thrown 30 interceptions. So it's about channeling and harnessing that consistency that we haven't always been able to see. That's what's been missing. And the same thing with the Pelicans. We always blamed it on the youth and the inexperience. And while that certainly can be a valid argument, the reality is this team on paper should be much better. When you really look at some of the teams that are better than them, do the San Antonio Spurs really have a better roster than the Pelicans? Maybe they have better coaching, which is certainly important. They don't have a better roster. Do the Memphis Grizzlies have a better roster than the New Orleans Pelicans? I don't think so. I guarantee if I were to poll most NBA fans outside of the city of Memphis, they wouldn't be able to name me more than 3 players on the team. They'd say John Morant, they'd probably say Jonas Valanciunas, and they'd probably say Dylan Brooks. That's about the extent that they can go. So when I look at the Pelicans, this is a team that, again, they blew a 17-point lead to the Portland Trailblazers when they were up by 17 with 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. That was against Damian Lillard without CJ McCollum. That's the team that we're dealing with here. And so when I look at Zion Williamson in particular, this guy's been absolutely fantastic. 27 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, efficient, super efficient. This guy scores on an average from around 4 feet away from the basket. He's been absolutely fantastic and on a tear. And if I am the Phoenix Suns or the Utah Jazz, I'm telling you right now, if the Pelicans can somehow, and again, I don't believe this will happen, if they can somehow creep into the play-in tournament and then somehow escape that and actually make it into the postseason, they wouldn't want to see him in the first round. Zion Williamson is not someone you'd want to see in the first round. The jubilance and the joy and the passion that he plays with, that's contagious. Absolutely permeates an entire locker room. And it can uplift the morale in a locker room. And we saw that the NBA has been trying to force feed us Zion Williamson. They tried to force feed us Zion Williamson into the postseason last year, and he came up a little bit short. So this is a really deep team that, again, it has underachieved, but it's won 5 of its last 8 games. It's starting to make a push. And if they can somehow, again, I'm not sure if I can see it happening, if they somehow creep into the postseason, whether it's the play-in tournament, whether it's actually the final group of 8, they're going to be a tougher out. They've got young legs. They can run up and down the court for days. They've got tremendous energy. You know that they'll play with heart. So I've always liked the complexion and the makeup of this team, but then I always look at the end result and the standings, and it just always leaves a lot to be desired. But hopefully now, and again, Lonzo is the X factor. If he doesn't have to drop 33 points, but if he plays this confidently, moving forward more consistently, this Pelicans team can make a run. They can make a run, and it would be certainly fascinating to see. Johnny Riff won Jokic MVP, no contest. At this point in the season, I would agree with that. Absolutely, he's going to win the MVP. There's no question about it. Zion is the face of the franchise, question mark? Yes. Yes, he is, Jonathan Rifkin. Yes, he is. If you think it's Brandon Ingram, you're kidding yourself. Zion Williamson became the face of the franchise the day he was drafted. The day he was drafted there, he was the face of the franchise. And he's been backing that up. He's been absolutely backing that up. There's no question about that. Okay. So now, with 2 weeks to go, certain teams have 8 games, 7 games, 6 games remaining. But as we're creeping up towards the postseason, I wanted to share which teams from the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference I think will make the NBA's play-in tournament as of right now, right? We got 2 weeks left between 6 to 8 games. These are the teams that I expect to make the NBA's play-in tournament. Let me start with the Western Conference at number 7. The team that I think is going to be just on the outside looking in is the Portland Trailblazers. Portland Trailblazers, I think ultimately they're only one game behind the Lakers, but they've got a pretty difficult stretch remaining. They're top 8 for the strength of schedule right now for the most difficult schedules in the league. I think they will ultimately go 4-3 in their final 7 games of the season. Damian Lillard has been fantastic, 28.4 points per game this year. And I think right now we'll start to see him rev up, start to turn that switch as we saw him do in the postseason last year, but especially in those final 8 games in the bubble last year, we saw who Damian Lillard became. He became an MVP. And obviously that carried over into the beginning of this year. But because of that huge, cumbersome burden that he had to carry with CJ McCollum and Nikola Jokic and Zach Collins out for large stretches of time, it started to catch up to him. But I think he's going to find his groove again now. I think he'll start to catch his wind a bit more. And I don't think this team will ultimately make it into the top 6. I think they'll make the postseason. But I see them finishing as the number 7th seed in the play-in tournament. At number 8, the Golden State Warriors. Golden State Warriors right now, such a fascinating team because, again, the only reason why we have any faith in them whatsoever is because Steph has been on an absolute tear. Again, 31.4 points per game, 37 points per game through the month of April. And he's scored 108 points through 3 games in May. If I do my quick math right off the top of my head, that's about 33.5 points per game. Now, when you look at their schedule, they really have a pretty easier schedule the rest of the way. Just the 17th hardest schedule remaining. They've got versus the Oklahoma City Thunder twice, Utah, Phoenix, New Orleans, and Memphis. But all these games are being played at home. So I think they'll go 4-2 to close out this stretch, and I think they'll finish as the 8th seed in the Western Conference. At number 9, going to go with the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, it's tough. They're such a difficult team to analyze because, yes, they have one of the easiest schedules remaining, but it's almost deceptive because what they've got is they've got at Minnesota, at Detroit, which are easy. At Toronto, the way that the Raptors have been playing recently, that's not going to be a walk in the park for them. They've got New Orleans versus Dallas, versus Sacramento twice, and at Golden State. And to be honest, I think that they're going to go 3-5 in their final 8 games. Now, because they already have a little bit of a cushion right now, they're 32-33, so just a half game behind the Golden State Warriors, but they've got a large enough cushion ahead of the San Antonio Spurs. I think it'll be just enough for them to kind of stay in that 9th spot right now. And again, you can't count out Memphis. Every time we've tried to count Memphis out the last couple of seasons, especially last year, they came within 1 game of the Portland Trailblazers of making the postseason. They finished half a game behind, ultimately finishing as the 9th seed. They were absolutely fantastic, and they were right on the precipice of making the postseason. But I think now that the NBA's play-in tournament has expanded the total teams, I think that they can make it this year. And then finally, the final team that I think at the end of the day is going to make the play-in tournament is the San Antonio Spurs. I know I just talked about the New Orleans Pelicans, but they've got a brutal 5-game and really 6-game stretch right now. They're going on the road. They got at the 76ers, at Charlotte, at Memphis, at Dallas, Golden State, and versus the Lakers. They may go 1-5, the Pelicans. And the San Antonio Spurs, while it's true they have the hardest schedule remaining in the league, they've got at Utah, at Sacramento, at Portland, versus Milwaukee, at the Nets, at the Knicks, and versus Phoenix twice. Surprisingly, I actually think that they will somehow find a way to come together and win. I think they could go 4-4. I think they might go 4-4, maybe 3-5, but I think it will ultimately be enough to lock up that number 10 seed. And again, I think they're just going to stave off the Pelicans. The Pelicans have to play a ton of road games. They're an inexperienced squad, an inexperienced bunch. And while I hope that I'm wrong, I see the San Antonio Spurs just finding a way to lock up that final spot. Now, shifting to the Eastern Conference in the number 7 seed, I think it's going to be the Miami Heat. The problem is right now they are neck and neck with the Boston Celtics. They've got about a half a game lead over the Boston Celtics, but the Celtics have a much easier final 7 games. In fact, they've got 2 games against the Celtics, the Miami Heat do, in Boston. Now, I think that they'll split, but ultimately I think the Celtics will go 5-2 in their schedule. So the margins are razor thin, but you look at the Miami Heat, they've got a really arduous final kind of 6 games. They've got 2 straight at Boston, but it goes versus Minnesota, that'll be easy, at the Boston Celtics twice, versus 76ers, at Milwaukee, and at Detroit. And again, a lot of these teams have real reasons to still play hard. The seedings are still on the line. So right now they're just a half a game over Boston, but I think that if they end up going this stretch, I just see them at the end of the day falling 1 spot behind the Celtics for number 7. At number 8, I've got the Charlotte Hornets. I love this team. LaMelo Ball is back. He just dropped like 23, 7, and 6 last night. I still think he's got a chance to win the Rookie of the Year award. I know Anthony Edwards has been consistent and has been playing all season, but I love LaMelo. He's back. He's healthy. He's contributing in a major way. And right now, they're 32-33. They're in the 8th spot. They're 1.5 games ahead of the Pacers, 2 games ahead of the Wizards, but they hold the tiebreaker over the Wizards. And again, they've got a difficult schedule too. I think they'll go 2-5, but ultimately, I think the big difference is because they're starting out with that cushion over the Wizards and the Pacers, and they hold the tiebreaker over the Washington Wizards, I think that they will just kind of manage to hold on to that 8th play-in spot. Again, I don't know if they're necessarily going to actually make it into the final group of 8, but for the play-in tournament, I see them finishing as the 8th seed. At number 9, the Washington Wizards. Yes, the Washington Wizards. And right now, this is the big reason why. They're only half a game back of the Indiana Pacers, but this is their schedule. At Milwaukee, at Toronto, at the Pacers, at the Hawks twice, versus Cleveland, and versus Charlotte. And they've been one of the hottest teams in the NBA. I think at the very least they go 4-3 through their final 7 games. I think they leapfrog over the Pacers by half a game. Now, again, the way that it might shake out, it's possible they may face them in that first 9 to 10 play-in tournament. I'll reveal my number 10 pick in just a second. But I just like the way that the Washington Wizards have been playing. Again, they were my dark horse team to reach the playoffs to start this year. Before the season even began, I said that I thought the Washington Wizards would make the playoffs, would be a top 8 seed. And right now they are fighting tooth and nail for it, but they've managed to turn around their season despite, for long stretches, having the worst record in the NBA. Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal, but especially Russell Westbrook has been on a tear recently, and I see the Wizards finishing at number 9. And at number 10, the Indiana Pacers. I don't think there's going to be change as far as the actual 4 teams in the play-in tournament, although ultimately right now Miami's at 6, Boston at 7, but I said those 2 teams will swap. But Toronto's like 3.5 games back. And I just think that the Pacers already have a large enough lead ahead of the Toronto Raptors that I think they'll be able to hold on to the number 10 spot again. They've got versus Sacramento, versus Atlanta, versus the Wizards, versus Cleveland, versus 76ers, versus Bucks, versus Lakers, and at Toronto. I think they go 3-5 to close out their final 8 games. But again, I think that it is just enough to stay in the play-in tournament. So those are the teams that I expect to play in the NBA's play-in tournament. Again, just 2 weeks remaining. So things are really starting to ramp up. It's getting closer and closer to that time. Very, very excited for that. But transitioning to the NFL. or actually rather, I'll take a break. I'll stick with the NBA first, and then I'll transition to the NFL. Let's stick with the NBA first. Some reports came out this morning surrounding the Portland Trailblazers head coach Terry Stotts and the Milwaukee Bucks head coach Mike Budenholzer. Terry Stotts reportedly likely to be fired, barring a deep playoff run. And for the Bucks, Mike Budenholzer, he's on the hot seat. And the Milwaukee Bucks ownership group is expecting at least a conference finals appearance. So let me start with the Portland Trailblazers and head coach Terry Stotts. I personally believe that he's a good coach. I do. But it's understandable that messages can wane. And over time, you can kind of turn a deaf ear to certain coaches when they're repeating the same messages over and over and over again. Because when you look at Terry Stotts, he's in his 9th season as the head coach. But when you look at his record, 394 and 316, 55% win completion. So he's won a whole lot more than he's lost. The reason why this is a conversation is because he is just 20 and 36 in the postseason, which is 37%. But when you look at what he's done, this is a guy who has led the Blazers to 7 consecutive postseason appearances. 7 of his 8 postseason appearances he's been playing. Or rather, not he's been playing, he's been coaching. Right? The only year that the Blazers didn't reach the postseason was his very first season with the team in 2012 and 2013. In those 7 playoff appearances, 3 times he's reached the conference semifinals, and 1 time he's even reached the conference finals just 2 years ago. And here's the reality. With that being said, with all that being said, what do we know? What we know is what wins in the NBA is talent. You have to have talented players. And if you honestly assess the Portland Trailblazers and compare them to the other teams in the Western Conference, this is really where they should be. They're about the 7th best team in the Western Conference. Damian Lillard is fantastic, and he has single-handedly carried this franchise for several years, since really his arrival. But CJ McCollum, yes, he's a borderline all-star player, an all-star caliber player. Nurkic is a really solid center when healthy, but he's been injured. Zach Collins is good. He's not great. Carmelo Anthony is aging and is an aged player. Still productive, but an aged player. Norman Powell is a solid starter and rotational piece. Anthony Simons, he won the NBA's dunk contest. Good for him. He just made like a crazy number of threes, like 13 straight threes a couple weeks ago. But if you really look at this roster, I think that Terry Stotts has actually done a pretty admirable job. I think he's gotten as much juice and as much out of this team together as he possibly can. And again, it's true that over time, you kind of expect different results, but at the same time, if you really analyze and assess the Portland Trailblazers and who they are, he's done a really good job. I understand if you want a new face, you want to go in a different direction, bring in someone who might change the culture a little bit, okay. But ultimately, talent is what wins in the NBA, and you can't manufacture it, and you have to deal with what you've got. And I don't think if the Portland Trailblazers were the 2nd seed or they were the 4th seed or they're the 7th seed now, I don't care where they'd be. Ultimately, I think they'd finish in the same spot, maybe a 2nd round playoff exit, which is about on par with how they finished under Terry Stotts. I don't think he could do any better of a job. So, it's not that I don't have a problem if they want to fire him. But I think they have to be realistic with what they have and say, okay, if we really want to move in a different direction, then maybe you have to trade CJ McCollum. Maybe you have to do something different to try and jumpstart this team. I don't think it is entirely Terry Stotts. Johnny Riff, only reason Stotts goes is if Dame wants him gone. Blazers would choose keeping Dame over Terry Stotts. Of course. I agree with that. I don't know if that's the case. By all accounts, it has appeared on the surface that Damian Lillard and Terry Stotts have a good relationship. If that's not the case, then there's no question. Then he'd be gone. But to sit here and say all of the shortcomings and blame all of the failures for this team because of the coach, I don't think that's the case. And that's why, as I transition now to Mike Budenholzer, I also think he's a good coach for the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, he's in a little bit of a different situation in that the expectations in Milwaukee are very different than the expectations in Portland. The expectations in Milwaukee are championship or bust. And that's reasonable because you've got a two-time MVP. But let's think about, when did Giannis Antetokounmpo win those two MVPs? Mike Budenholzer, this is his third year as the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks. In the regular season, he's got a record of 154 and 63. That's a 71% win percentage as a head coach. In the postseason, he's 15 and 10, 60% win percentage for the Milwaukee Bucks, not just in his career with the Milwaukee Bucks. So, or rather, that is actually his career. But the point is, when you look at Mike Budenholzer, again, in his 3 seasons, the Bucks have finished with 2 consecutive best records in the NBA. He's a 2-time NBA Coach of the Year. And I think that last year is a little hard to evaluate because in the bubble, there appear to be some aberrations. I just think that something about that atmosphere, being in that condensed space, the Miami Heat just found a rhythm. They just found a really good run. And actually, with the Milwaukee Bucks, when you look at their team, yes, you can argue, can Mike Budenholzer make more in-game adjustments? Sure, of course he can. But ultimately, it comes down to the players. I think that if Giannis steps up and plays better, if Chris Middleton steps up and plays better, that they will have more success. If Giannis plays like he has against the Brooklyn Nets the last 2 games in the postseason this efficiently, then yeah, the Milwaukee Bucks will reach the Eastern Conference Finals. But the problem is we haven't seen that. So I think it was a bit of an anomaly last year. And to suggest that, again, the shortcomings are because of this particular head coach, I'm not sure if that's the right call. I do think Giannis likes Mike Budenholzer as well. So, I mean, I understand, again, with the talent that they have, those are the expectations that have been set, and they should. Because when you got Giannis, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, they've got a really deep team. Brook Lopez, Dante DiVincenzo. I like the team, Pat Connaughton. But I think the players have to step up a bit too. I understand the coach's got to make requisite in-game adjustments, but the players have to step up too. And again, I think the only way that he gets fired, if the Milwaukee Bucks face the Brooklyn Nets in the second round, which it looks imminent that will happen, if they push the Nets to 7 games and it's tight throughout, it comes down to the wire, comes down to KD or Kyrie hitting a late game jumper to sink the Bucks, I think Mike Budenholzer stays. I think he remains the head coach, and I think he kind of quashes some of these concerns, and I think it kind of drenches that hot seat with some cold water a bit. But if they go out in 5 games or fewer and they look absolutely overwhelmed and overmatched, then yeah, you got to move in a different direction. Okay. Transitioning to the NFL, this was an interesting story. I don't know if people got a chance to see this interaction, but Philadelphia Eagles had an interesting draft. They actually made a good pick. They traded up to select Devontae Smith out of Alabama, the wide receiver with the number 10 overall pick. But here's what was interesting. In the 3rd round, they made another selection to draft the defensive tackle Milton Williams in the 3rd round. And there's a video of the GM of the Eagles, Howie Roseman, giving a fist bump to all the executives, all the inside personnel. And then there's an awkward fist bump exchange with a guy who was a senior longtime scout, Tom Donahoe. And this is what Howie Roseman said in reference to that awkward war room interaction, because ESPN had cameras in every single team's war draft room. So we could see how the interactions unfolded. And there seemed to be some disconnect between those two guys. So this is what Howie Roseman said. We have an Eagles draft board that reflects a lot of things, and my job is to bring them all together. My job is to get the coaches' perspective, the scouts' perspective, the medical perspective, the character perspective as we do this process. My job is to try to reflect all of that. I listen to everyone to try and make these decisions. And at the same time, someone may be unhappy because it may not be reflected accurately in all the information I have that they may not. So the Eagles went 4-11-1 last year. And apparently last year, Howie Roseman went against the grain in selecting Jalen Reagor and Jalen Hurts over Justin Jefferson and Jeremy Chin, according to sources, right? And Jeffrey Lurie, the owner, was apparently influential in that decision to select Jalen Hurts. When we think about the Philadelphia Eagles, the only way that we can describe them now is through the words dysfunction and disconnect. Those are the only two. What I hate the most is when you ask people to explain a simple answer. Because if it's so simple, then there shouldn't be much explanation that needs to follow it. Because what ends up happening is most of the time when you ask for a simple explanation to a simple answer, they provide a more convoluted answer. So this is normally more complicated than this actually needs to be. You ask the Lakers, why did the Lakers win the championship last year? Simple answer, LeBron James. Why did the Tampa Bay Buccaneers win the Super Bowl last year? On a general level, because of Tom Brady. Yes, the defense played well in the Super Bowl, but the main answer is Tom Brady. How was the light bulb invented? How did Thomas Edison invent the light bulb? Because he's just a brilliant guy. He's just a genius. That's what it is. It's a simple answer to a simple question. There's no convoluted answer. So when I look at the Philadelphia Eagles and you ask that very same question, how did the Philadelphia Eagles win the Super Bowl in 2018? It's a convoluted answer. It was an aberration, an anomaly, clearly. They had one fortuitous season in which they made an incredible run through the NFL. They had a quarterback, their star quarterback, tore his ACL midway through the season. And their heralded backup, Nick Foles, somehow carried them into the postseason on this miraculous run to winning their first Super Bowl in the Super Bowl era. This is a team in the Philadelphia Eagles that in the history of their organization, this is the fourth NFL title that they've won, the first Super Bowl in the Super Bowl era. The last time they even won an NFL title, which is what it was called, NFL championships actually, were in 1948, 1949, and the most recent NFL championship of theirs was 1960. Again, that was prior to the Super Bowl era. And so what this truly reveals is the dysfunction and the disconnect that has existed and still exists within this Philadelphia Eagles organization. Because it is just an absolute mess in there. And there's no continuity. There's no harmony. Clearly, all these guys aren't on the same page. That's clearly relevant. And when you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, if this is how they're managing their team, if this is how they're making their decisions, it's an absolute miracle that how they won that Super Bowl. Because I guarantee you this is how they've been conducting business and how they've been organizationally being run for the last several years. So why did Doug Peterson get fired? because Jeffrey Lurie and Doug weren't on the same page. They wanted to go in a different direction. They had a different vision for how to accomplish their goals. And so now when you've got all this disconnect, this is what leads to these issues. And so that lack of unity, that lack of harmony, those are the key traits to typically a successful season. And we just haven't seen that with the Eagles thus far. Okay, final topic, and then my Malkin's moments. This was an interesting story. Very interesting story. So DK Metcalf has a chance to make the Olympic team. Yes, he is apparently trying out for the 100-meter dash. In fact, there's an event at the U.S. Track and Field Golden Games and Distance Open, which is back actually this Sunday in Walnut, California. And Metcalf was listed as one of the participants. In fact, he had kind of hinted at participating in the Olympics a couple days ago. And why did all of this get some buzz? How did he kind of put himself on the map? It's when he had that epic chase down of the Cardinals cornerback Buda Baker, defensive back Buda Baker, where he sprinted back after a pick almost the entire length of the floor and just prevented the touchdown, the pick six. And he had reached, according to Next Gen Stats, he had reached a peak speed of 22.64 miles per hour. Full stride in DK Metcalf. Now, this is the interesting thing. This is actually not the first time that we've seen NFL players participate at the Olympics. In fact, in the history of both the NFL and the Olympics, there are 40 athletes to have competed in the Olympics that had played in the NFL. 37 played in the Summer Olympics, 3 competed in the Winter Olympics. Obviously, you think about Jim Thorpe, who at the time was with the Canton Bulldogs in 1912. I wasn't born yet, but Jim Thorpe was a tremendous athlete, one of the greatest American athletes ever, won 2 gold medals. You have, Bob Hayes was in there with 2 gold medals as well. Henry Carr as well won 2 gold medals. And it's really interesting because when you think about some football athletes, we always kind of question how would they stack up towards other athletes, right? We look at NBA players as enigmas and really just avatars because they're so much taller than everyone else. There's no way anyone else can replicate what they're doing, but football players are in this interesting position of oftentimes they can be a similar height to you and I, but they're absolutely ripped and they're extremely fast, but we never got a chance. And they've got some burners in the NFL, but we never get a chance to really see them play. I mean, even Glenn Davis won 3 gold medals at the Olympics. Herschel Walker competed in bobsledding in the Winter Olympics. And then when we take a look at the Summer Olympics and the actual track and field events, there were 14 sprinters in the history of the Olympics of guys that played in the NFL. Right there, 14 sprinters. Bob Hayes in 1964 won 2 gold medals, and Jim Hines, who participated in 1956 and 1960, and he also won 2 gold medals. But the reason why I point those 2 guys out is because they won at least 1 gold medal in the 100-meter dash. And now we have a guy in DK Metcalf who, if he was to participate, which, by the way, in order just to qualify for the team, you have to record a 100-meter dash in 10.05 seconds or less. The record is 9.58 seconds. But you have to record it in under 10.05 seconds just to qualify for the team. And DK Metcalf, here's a guy who is 6'4", 230 pounds, absolutely jacked. He's a rock. He is super strong. He just caught a franchise best for Seattle 1,303 receiving yards last year. That was top 7 in the NFL. 10 receiving catches, top 10 in the NFL amongst wide receivers. 83 catches last year. He was a Pro Bowl player. He made the Pro Bowl last year. And from a purely narrative standpoint, this would be absolutely spectacular. For DK Metcalf to compete in the Olympics would be one of the greatest sports stories this year. It truly would be. Now, I think he's going to be a little bit too big and too strong to be able to reach that, perhaps to qualify. But man, he would legitimately be the first real prominent NFL player to participate in the Olympics since Herschel Walker did it. Because a lot of these other guys, they played sparingly in the NFL. They didn't really have notable NFL careers. This is a guy in DK Metcalf who is making a name for himself. And if he can translate that to the Olympics, again, we'd be looking at NFL players and categorizing them in a different light, in a different way as athletes that we've never done, that we've never heaped this kind of praise on them as athletes as we would this year if he was able to qualify. Just again, shows the versatility, tremendous versatility of him, of NFL athletes. It would be an absolute fantastic story to hear. Final topic of the day, my Malkins moments. I don't have too many, just a couple. The Colorado Rockies, they played the San Francisco Giants yesterday in a doubleheader. Lost the first one badly. They gave up 10 runs in the first inning, but then they played a doubleheader again later that evening. And they came back. They trailed 6-0. And they trailed 6-2 in the bottom of the ninth. And they came back on this wild comeback, capped off by a Charlie Blackmon 2-run homer to win the game for the Colorado Rockies. That was absolutely spectacular. Again, just one of these random games in the middle of the year, but you have these special moments. He was absolutely fantastic. And then a big shout out to Steph Curry as well. Steph Curry scored his 300th three-pointer this year. In fact, that's the 4th time in his career that he's reached this mark during the season. He just continues to amaze the NBA world, the sports world, with his shooting prowess, his shooting displays, and his shooting skill. Just the fact that he's got unlimited range, can hit from all parts of the court. He changed the game. He's one of the top 5 most influential NBA players of all time. And a major shout out to him. That was absolutely spectacular. All right. That's all the time that I got for you today. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Morning Joe on Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube page. Follow me on Twitter. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.